you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. Now, if you have been watching my videos, recently I have reviewed the Full Metal Homage Smee brand digital watch, and I am so impressed by it that I really wanted to see what else this brand has to offer. Now, you'll also know, if you have watched my videos before, that I particularly like automatic watches, so I thought, what is a Smee automatic watch like? Now, this particular watch, when I bought it, I wasn't quite sure which watch it was homaging. I was assuming it was homaging a watch, but I hadn't seen this particular model before. I had since been in touch with some of my friends on some of my watch forums, and they've directed me towards the watch that you see here, and you'll see they look very, very similar. When I did buy this watch, however, I broke one of my AliExpress buying rules. One of those rules is don't buy a super affordable watch if it comes in a bracelet, if it comes with a bezel or a moving bezel. However, I still bought it anyway. It was super affordable and it is quite a good looking watch. Before we jump into the review, I just want to say a big thank you to all those out there that have subscribed to my channel. I really do appreciate it. It really does motivate me to make more content about watches on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It does make a difference to me and the channel. But let's jump in and have a look at this watch. This is the Smee 9232. Now, I bought this whilst it was on special at AliExpress, and I chose not to pay the extra money for the box. So as you can see, it just came with this little hang tag. Whilst it was on special, it was about 38 Australian dollars, and I think that saved me around about 5 Australian dollars from the normal price. So what are the dimensions on this one? Well, the case diameter is 43.9 millimeters. It is 16 millimeters thick. It has a lug-to-lug of 49.9 millimeters. It has a lug width of 22 millimeters. And the weight on this bracelet, sized to my 6 3/4 inch wrist, is 127 grams. Now, I ordered this with the silver blue dial variation, which, as you can see here, there's like a light blue which fades out to a darker blue, but there are a number of other options available. A black dial and a black bracelet. There's the same dial as mine with a black bracelet. There's a black dial and silver bracelet. There's a golden black and a blue and gold. As I've said, this variation has a faded blue dial. I thought it was quite nice. I like how it faded out to the edge there to that darker blue. The numbers, that Smee logo and the word automatic are all printed on in white, as well as that frame around the date. The hands are partially skeletonized. They're fairly simple, but it's that second hand that I particularly like. It's got that nice counterbalance, that nice slim arrow length, and the arrow tip with a slight syringe tip, and it pushes quite far out. And you'll see there's a little bit of white on the hands as well as on the tip of that arrow, and that's the only lume that is on this watch. I'll put in some lume video now. As you can see, it's just the 3 hands. There's no orientation, which makes it a little bit hard to tell what the time is, and I doubt that this lume is going to last all night long. If you have a look at that inner chapter ring, it's done actually really quite well. There's that blue ring with the cutouts for those applied hour markers. They look like sort of a polished steel material. Not sure if it is polished steel or if it's just a covered plastic, but it sort of looks and reflects a bit like steel. When you're looking straight down, you can see the minute track on the bezel, but if you look up and under on an angle, there's that railway style minute track, which that second hand is moving out towards. But the way it's designed, looking straight down, you can't actually see it. I think that is partially because of this very interesting shaped acrylic crystal. It has almost like a step up or a boxed edge acrylic, and then a very slight dome on it. Now, this bezel is rather interesting as well. Firstly, it's fixed, it doesn't move. They've decided, rather than spend more money trying to make it click and make it move, they're just going to fix it in place, which I guess for an exceptionally affordable watch, it's probably not a bad idea, because I doubt it would have been a very good bezel action. You'll also see that it's under some sort of domed acrylic material here. That's actually a dome shape. Then underneath there is this black with the markings in white. The case material is described as an alloy, so it's obviously some sort of mix of metals with a sort of electroplated or some sort of finish applied on the top. That finish does come across a bit like polish. It's not particularly well done. It's not like a nice stainless steel polish, but it certainly does the job. And they've done some interesting little facet here, or a little step up with the case up onto the watch top of the case there, and that gives it a little bit more movement in the dial, a little bit more extra character. I do quite like the crown on this one. It's unsigned, but I do quite like the shape and the size of it. It does have rather interesting character to it. It's not screw down, but it is a manual wind watch, so you can manually wind. It feels okay. Inside here there is a rather cheap Chinese movement, so sometimes these things sound quite loud. This one's actually not too bad, and as you can see, it does actually have hacking. The second hand does tend to jump around a little bit, especially when you're moving that crown out and in. You'll see it sort of sometimes occasionally stops, doesn't quite start perfectly, and jumps around a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this on the time grapher now and see how this interesting, rather affordable Chinese movement is running. Now I think this really does represent quite well what this cheaper Chinese movement really is. You can see all these dots everywhere. This actually should be a nice straight line. Because it isn't, it's sort of showing that the movement's sort of a bit out of whack. However, it is a 21,600 vibrations per hour. The beat error is actually not too bad at 0.6. Amplitude's rather low. It should be closer up to the 300 mark. And we've got a plus 8 seconds per day at the moment. But as I've mentioned, this should be a much straighter line. When it's all like this, it's showing that the movement is not that great. And if we have a look at the back of the watch, we can see that movement that we're talking about. It does have a see-through case back. You can see that it's an automatic movement. Obviously I've mentioned that it's also hand winding. If you have a look on the back, there's a few markings. It tells you that it's a SCME, 3 atmospheres, model 9232 stainless steel back. Obviously the backing part of this watch, of this case back, is stainless steel, the rest of it isn't, and that it does have that 3 atmospheres of water resistance. But let's have a look about this jingly jangly bracelet. Well, first of all, it has hollow end links. You can see fairly clearly that it is rolled steel. It's made up of sort of polished outer areas or outer links with a brushed center feature. You can already see that it is a pressed steel clasp, but the actual clasp itself, or the look of it, is reasonably good. It tucks in quite nicely into the bracelet itself. It has the SME logo. It just has that single pusher, which is also polished, or looks to be polished. Strangely enough, this is the sort of bracelet that I would think would tear out a lot of these excessive arm hairs that I have. But I haven't actually found that to be the case. It's very cheap, it's rattly, it's jingly, it's jangly. It looks a little bit nasty, but it hasn't ripped any arm hairs out so far. And this is what it looks like on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. It actually fits in quite nicely. That case dimension does sound quite large, but because that effective lug to lug isn't too big, it sits quite nicely on my wrist. It sits a little bit up and above, sort of floats a little bit because of that case back that sticks out so far, but it does have a very slight curve which makes it look a little bit better. I do have to say that this watch actually doesn't look too bad. It's quite a nice, visually pleasing watch from a distance. And I think that's probably a big part of this. It's sort of from a distance, it looks quite good. So that leads me into what do I like about this watch? What don't I like about it? And what would I change? Well, the big thing that stands out to me about this super affordable watch is that it actually looks quite good and it fits quite nicely. It's not too heavy, so it feels quite good on the wrist. And really, as I said, from a distance, it looks like quite a nice, neat and tidy watch. And speaking of money, it was a super affordable watch, and that's quite a positive for it. If you just want a fairly simple automatic watch, you don't want to spend a lot of money, especially if you particularly like the watch that this is homaging, this might be worth getting. But the overall quality of the watch is not particularly good. Having that fixed bezel, it's not very good. It's not great. I guess it is better than having a really sloppy bezel, but it'd be nice to have a good moving bezel on it. The movement inside is probably one of the big negatives of it. You've got that cheap Chinese style movement. The bracelet is not really very good, even though it's relatively comfortable, even though it doesn't grab any of my arm hairs. You can tell it's quite cheap. And of course it has that very low water resistance and those materials that are used. There's no stainless steel on there other than a little bit of that case back in behind there. So what would I like to change about this watch? Well, I'd like to change a fair bit about this one. What I'd like to change is put a better movement in there, get it made out of some better materials, put a better quality bracelet on it. But of course, doing all that would significantly increase the price and it kind of take away from what this watch has to offer. And do I want to pay 3-4 times the price for this style of watch with better materials, better bracelet and a better movement? I'm not sure. And if that was the case, and I did particularly like this homaged style watch, there are some other watches out there, or some other watch brands that do homage this watch with some of those better features. But let's flip the camera around now and I'll give you some of my final thoughts on this Smee Automatic homage watch. So when you put all the things about this watch together and think about whether it's a good watch or not, I couldn't wholeheartedly say to you that this is an amazing watch. It's not an amazing watch, but really when you consider the price that it cost, it's actually quite an okay watch. But would I recommend that you buy it? Well, I think for the price, you can't go too wrong buying something like this. However, there might be some other watches out there that are a little bit better. As I mentioned earlier, I broke one of my rules to buy this watch. I bought a cheap watch that has a bracelet and has a bezel. Normally when I'm buying these cheaper, more affordable watches, I do tend to try to look for simple watches, something without a bezel, something without a metal bracelet, so that that little bit of money that you are putting into the watch goes into the watch head, not the rest of the stuff around it. So I think that's one of the biggest problems with this watch. That small amount of money is being spread out way too thinly amongst the watch. But I am glad that I had the experience with it. I'm glad I got to wear it. It feels and looks better on wrist than I would have expected for the price. So can't really complain too much. Alright guys, I really appreciate you watching and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.